When someone rejects you, it's easy to internalize that moment as a reflection of your worth. You start asking yourself questions like, what did I do wrong? Or was I not enough? But here's the truth most people don't realize in the heat of that rejection. It wasn't about your value. It was about his perspective, his readiness, or his emotional capacity at that moment in time. You could have shown up as the most grounded, loving, attractive version of yourself, and still he might have turned away. Not because you lacked anything, but because he wasn't in a place to recognize or receive what you had to offer. Rejection often reveals more about the person doing the rejecting than the one being rejected. It speaks to their fears, their wounds, their timing, and sometimes their inability to meet someone at the depth they deserve. We have this conditioned response to treat rejection as failure, but in reality it's a form of misalignment. He may have been overwhelmed by your certainty, intimidated by your confidence, or simply caught in his own emotional noise. Maybe he didn't know what he wanted, or he thought he wanted someone easier to control. Maybe he was still healing from someone else, or maybe he wasn't ready to be vulnerable with someone who actually saw him clearly. When someone turns you down, it's not a final judgment on your worth. It's a reflection of their current limitations. In fact, some people reject others because deep down they do see your worth, and it scares them. They don't feel ready for the standard you live by, the emotional accountability you bring, or the version of themselves they'd have to become to keep up with you. That can be confronting. And for someone who's not ready to grow, it's easier to reject the opportunity than to rise to it. So if you were rejected, take a breath and zoom out. Don't shrink yourself trying to fit into someone's momentary confusion. Don't rewrite your value based on someone else's inability to embrace it. Their decision wasn't a mirror of your inadequacy. It was a window into their limitations. And that's something you should be grateful to have seen early. This is where emotional maturity comes in. Rejection doesn't mean you need to try harder or prove yourself. It means you get to pivot your energy away from someone who couldn't see clearly and towards someone who can. You don't chase validation from those who can't give it. You embody value and the right people will feel it, not flee from it. So instead of asking a why wasn't I enough, ask a why would I want someone who didn't recognize what I bring? Because when the right person comes along, not just ready for love, but capable of it, they won't be confused about you. And they definitely won't reject what they're lucky to have found. When someone rejects you, they often expect you to linger. Maybe not in a dramatic, desperate way, but in subtle, ongoing gestures. A like here, a comment there, a late night text that hints you're still emotionally available. That's the unspoken assumption. Even if they didn't want to pursue you, they still expect to occupy space in your mind. So when you don't fight, when you don't follow up, and when you don't try to win them over, it rattles something they didn't know was fragile. Their sense of control. Your silence in that moment becomes more powerful than any clever comeback or emotional plea could ever be. It becomes a statement, not of bitterness, not of pride, but of quiet self-possession. And make no mistake, people feel it. They feel when you no longer orbit them. They notice the stillness where your energy used to be. When your attention disappears, it creates a void. And here's the part they never saw coming. That void is deafening. There's a very human tendency to assume we are someone's last thought, their unresolved chapter. The unresolved chapter. So when you don't play that part, when you disappear without drama, without an emotional mess, it forces them to confront the reality that they may not have mattered as much as they thought. That stings, not because they wanted you necessarily, but because they wanted the option of you. The emotional safety net, the flattering background presence, and suddenly it's gone. What people rarely talk about is how much attention acts as emotional currency. When you give someone your time, your thoughts, your energy, even after they've turned you down, you're still giving them value. But when you stop, when the texts don't come, when you stop watching their stories, when you pull your energy back completely, it sends a message. You don't get access to me just because I was once interested in you. That's what truly disrupts their narrative. The silence doesn't say, I'm angry. It says, I respect myself too much to entertain this, and that respect, when someone isn't used to being held accountable for how they treat others, is a sharp wake-up call. Because it implies that they're not the center of the story, that their rejection didn't define you, It just redirected you. Now, yeah, people don't expect peace after rejection. They expect noise. They expect confusion. They expect you to orbit. So when you offer nothing but distance and calm, it creates a powerful contrast. That's the kind of silence that speaks volumes. That's the kind of silence that makes them wonder if they underestimated you. If maybe, just maybe, they misread the situation entirely. And the truth is, they did. They thought you would linger. But instead, you evolved. Quietly, gracefully, and completely. And that silence, that was the loudest thing they ever heard from you. There's something incredibly powerful about not chasing someone who's rejected you. In a world where so many people are conditioned to seek approval, to earn love, or to fight for someone's attention even after being turned away, choosing not to chase becomes a radical act of self-respect. And it's one most people aren't prepared for, especially the person who rejected you. Simon who rejected you. When you didn't pursue him, when you didn't try to explain yourself or convince him to reconsider, you communicated something rare and deeply impactful, that your sense of value wasn't dependent on his opinion. That even in the face of disappointment, you could stand your ground emotionally. You weren't trying to win him back. You were already aligned with someone more important, yourself. That is what emotional self-respect looks like. It's not coldness, it's not pride, it's clarity. It's clarity. It's knowing that if someone can't see your worth clearly the first time, your job isn't to illuminate it for them. It's to protect it. And instead of convincing him why he should want you, you let his choice stand. That silence wasn't passive. It was deeply active. It said, I trust myself enough not to beg for someone who didn't choose me. Most people don't realize how attractive that kind of self-possession is until it's no longer around. It doesn't look like withdrawal. It looks like maturity. You didn't play the game. You didn't create chaos. You simply removed yourself, not to manipulate, but because you understood something fundamental. Someone who genuinely values you doesn't need to be chased. And here's where it really starts to unravel for him. He might have expected hurt. He might have expected confusion. But he didn't expect peace. He didn't expect grace. He didn't expect a woman who could feel pain and still keep her boundaries intact. And that shakes something in him. Because in that moment, he sees the difference between someone who needs attention and someone who knows they deserve better than crumbs. You see, we live in a time where over-explaining, over-apologizing, and over-proving have become the norm. So when someone simply accepts a no and walks away with their dignity, it breaks the pattern. It forces the other person to sit with the consequences of their choice. And that stillness, your refusal to chase, creates a mirror. He's left looking at himself, at what he passed on, and wondering why your energy didn't linger the way he thought it would. You didn't chase. You didn't perform. You simply stood tall in your self-worth and chose to walk away without noise. And in doing that, you flipped the script. You stopped the cycle. And without ever raising your voice, you said everything that needed to be said. I know what I bring to the table. I don't need to beg someone to sit down. Many men are taught through culture, ego, or past experiences that they will always be the one with the upper hand. That even if they reject someone, they will remain on that person's mind. They're conditioned to believe that they can walk away from a connection and still hold emotional real estate in your heart. It's subtle, but it's deeply embedded. The expectation that even if they say a no, you'll still want them. You'll still wonder. You'll still be there, just in case they change their mind. So when you didn't do that, when you didn't text him after he pulled away, when you didn't try to keep the door open, when you didn't subtly linger in his digital world or wait in emotional limbo, it disrupted his internal narrative. And for the first time, he had to confront the truth that many people never prepare for. Just because you rejected someone doesn't mean you stay important to them. This shift is uncomfortable for someone who's used to being wanted, especially if, on some level, he thought he was the prize. He may have assumed you'd wait, or that you'd continue to check in, or at the very least, that your attention would stay on him. That's not necessarily malicious. It's often just a habit of how he's experienced rejection before. Many men don't lose people who respect themselves. They lose people who try to win them back. And so, they get used to being chased, even when they say no. But you didn't chase. You disappeared from his emotional view. You didn't turn your rejection into a campaign to prove your worth. And what makes that so powerful is that it violates an expectation he didn't even realize he had. that he could reject you and still keep your interest in his back pocket. When you chose not to orbit, it wasn't just a surprise, it was a threat to the role he had placed himself in. Suddenly, he wasn't the one in control. He wasn't the center. He became just another person who missed out. And worse, he started to feel it. Not because you punished him. Not because you lashed out, but because you stopped participating in the story he thought would play out a certain way. This kind of indifference is potent because it forces emotional accountability. When you're no longer available, it removes the illusion of endless access. And it leaves him wondering, why doesn't she care? Why didn't she fight? But the answer isn't bitterness. It's maturity. You didn't stay where you weren't chosen. You didn't try to teach him your worth. You already knew it. In a world that often rewards ego, your quiet exit wasn't expected. And in not playing the role he assumed you would, you disrupted his comfort. That's what shook him, not the rejection he gave you, but the realization that you didn't give him the aftermath he was banking on. When you stopped giving him your attention, when you didn't reach out, didn't explain, didn't try to maintain any form of connection, you did something most people never find the courage to do. You took back your emotional power. And in doing that, you sent a message that was louder than any declaration of self-worth could ever be. You showed him, without needing to say it, that he didn't hold emotional leverage over you. This is what most people don't realize. Attention is a form of currency in relationships. You didn't disappear to hurt him, you disappeared to heal, but in doing so, you revealed something he hadn't prepared for. The consequences of emotional immaturity, of dismissing someone who actually cared, of thinking that you could be turned away and still stay within reach. Now he's sitting in a silence he created, a silence that echoes louder with time. And it's not the loss of control that bothers him most, it's the loss of significance, that you're not waiting, that you're not watching, that you've moved on, and he's just a name in your past now, not someone who still holds emotional weight. That's what really started to break him, not just the absence of your attention, but the absence of his relevance, because once he rejected you, he assumed he could still matter. But your quiet, dignified exit showed him something else entirely, that your life continued beautifully and unapologetically without him. And that's a truth he can't unfeel. He thought you'd struggle to move on. That's the part he never said out loud, but quietly believed. Maybe not because he thought you were weak, but because somewhere deep down, his ego assumed he had a unique place in your heart, that he was someone unforgettable, someone whose absence would leave a noticeable hole in your life. So when you didn't fall apart, when you didn't spiral, when you didn't reach out or look lost without him, that's when something started to shift, not in you, but in him. He didn't anticipate your peace. He expected pain. He expected the usual script, tears, longing, confusion. But what he witnessed instead was strength. You moved forward not with anger, not with resentment, but with quiet confidence. And that shook him because it challenged everything he believed about his impact. There's a strange way people attach meaning to their importance in your life by how much you seem to suffer when they're gone. It's as if your pain is proof that they mattered. And when you don't give them that proof, when you reclaim your dignity and move on with grace, it forces a painful reflection. Maybe I wasn't as irreplaceable as I thought I was. And here's what really began to break him. Watching you glow up without any help from him, watching you heal, grow, laugh, and thrive, not as a performance, not as a mask, but as a natural progression of someone who chose herself. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't trying to win the breakup. You were just living. And that in itself became the loudest message you could send. You see, people don't always feel your absence immediately, but they do feel your evolution. When someone expects to leave you in pieces and instead sees you become more whole, it challenges their narrative. They start to wonder, was I ever that important? Did she ever really need me? But the better question, the one that echoes louder, is why didn't she fall apart without me? He underestimated you. He didn't realize your strength wasn't reactive. It was foundational. And as the days passed and you continued to grow, to shine, to attract new energy and new peace into your life, he began to feel the one thing his ego couldn't protect him from, regret. Not because he suddenly became the person you needed, not because he finally understood you, but because he lost access to something real. And now he had to watch from a distance as you became even more of what he never truly appreciated. That's the part that broke him. Not that you were gone, but that you were better off. And that he wasn't part of that version of you. When he realized you weren't going to come back, the reality of his choice started to hit him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He might have rejected you with certainty, thinking it was the right decision in the moment, but he didn't count on the power of your absence to echo louder than any words could. There's a unique kind of pain that comes not from the chaos of drama or confrontation, but from the calm and quiet loss of someone who was once a significant part of your life. He may have expected anger or desperation, a fight to keep him close, a flurry of text or calls begging for attention. Instead, what he got was silence. Not silence of bitterness or revenge, but silence of peace. That peace meant you had already moved on, emotionally and mentally, without him. And that was more painful for him than any outburst could have been. It's often said that people don't miss what they had, but what they lost. And in this case, he didn't miss you simply as a presence or a person, but as the potential he let slip away. He saw the version of you that could have been part of his life, someone who brought light, confidence, and authenticity, and realized too late that his rejection was a closing door, not just a pause. There's a vulnerability in that kind of loss. It's a silent acknowledgement that his choice wasn't just about him, but about what he refused to see in you. And because you didn't chase or beg or explain, he was left with no option but to face the full weight of his decision alone. That's a lonely place. A quiet reckoning where he has to wrestle with the fact that you weren't just a moment. You were a chapter, and now that chapter is closed. The calmness of your exit was a powerful statement. It communicated boundaries, self-respect, and emotional maturity. Those are traits that don't disappear quietly. They linger in the mind of the person who let them go. They become a reminder of what could have been and what will no longer be. That reminder is a subtle but persistent ache that grows over time. He may not say it out loud, but inside there's a growing awareness that the story he wrote for himself, one where he could reject you and keep you waiting in the wings, was an illusion. You weren't waiting. You weren't hoping. You weren't stuck. And that realization is what unsettles him most. This kind of emotional loss is different from heartbreak or jealousy. It's a quiet form of regret that comes from understanding that some doors, once closed with intention, don't reopen. And that's why your peaceful absence didn't just break him. It transformed his understanding of what it means to lose someone truly valuable. When he saw you moving on so naturally, without bitterness or regret, it caught him completely off guard. It's one thing to reject someone and expect that person to linger in emotional limbo, but it's a whole different reality when that person moves forward with grace and strength. He didn't anticipate that you would continue to grow, to flourish, and to reclaim your happiness without him. Your ability to move forward wasn't just about healing from rejection. It was a declaration of your self-worth. By choosing not to dwell on what could have been or to waste time in regret, you showed that your happiness wasn't dependent on him or his approval. This kind of emotional independence is incredibly powerful because it signals that your life has its own rhythm, its own momentum, and it doesn't pause for anyone who chooses to walk away. This was the real shock for him, that your life kept going beautifully and unapologetically without him in it. The days passed and you didn't just survive, you thrived. Whether it was pursuing new passions, strengthening friendships, or simply embracing your own company, you demonstrated that rejection wasn't a dead end, but a redirection towards something better. And that growth is contagious. When he saw you glowing with confidence, it made him question everything he thought he knew about the connection you shared. It wasn't just about losing you, it was about losing the potential of what you could have been together. Watching you evolve without him forced him to confront the fact that maybe, just maybe, he underestimated you. That you were stronger, wiser, and more capable of joy than he gave you credit for. This kind of growth isn't a performance. It's not about showing off or proving a point. It's a natural consequence of self-respect and the refusal to let someone else's rejection define your narrative. When you step into your power like that, you no longer need to explain yourself or seek validation. You simply become the best version of yourself, and that in itself becomes a powerful statement. He might have believed that rejecting you was the final chapter, but your evolution proved it was only a new beginning. It broke him because it shattered his assumption that rejection leads to despair. Instead, it led to your freedom. And freedom, when worn with grace and confidence, is impossible to ignore. The lesson here is simple but profound. When you don't allow rejection to stunt your growth, you reclaim your narrative. You become untouchable, not because you're unreachable, but because you're unapologetically yourself. And that's what truly unsettles someone who thought they still held power over you. One of the most profound reasons why your silence and withdrawal affected him so deeply is because it left him with nothing to cling to. When someone expects you to be emotionally available, even after rejection, they rely on your presence as a constant, even if it's just as a fallback option or a safety net. Your attention acts like a tether, keeping them connected to your world and your energy. When you suddenly remove that tether without explanation or drama, it creates a void that's unsettling and unfamiliar. He didn't just lose your attention, he lost access to the emotional connection he assumed he still had. This loss is different from outright conflict or confrontation because it leaves no space to argue, no room to negotiate, no chance to reconcile. It's a clean break, but it's also a complete disruption of the expected pattern. The pattern where he could reject you, but still expect you to orbit him, keep tabs on him, and make him feel important. Your quiet disappearance shattered that illusion. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was simply absolute. And in that absoluteness, he felt the weight of what he lost. That weight isn't always immediate. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, or even months before it sinks in. But when it does, it can be profound because it forces him to reckon not just with the fact that you moved on, but with the realization that he was never truly indispensable. This kind of loss is often more painful than active confrontation because it's wrapped in absence rather than presence. There's no closure, no final argument, no last message to dissect. There's just emptiness where something once existed. And for someone who thought they had control, that emptiness is a reminder of their loss, a loss that can't be filled by pride or excuses. What really breaks him is the knowledge that your emotional world no longer includes him. That you didn't just walk away, you vanished from the landscape of his life. And that vanishing act speaks volumes about your self-respect and your boundaries. It says you're not available for anyone who doesn't see your value from the start. It says you're done trying to prove yourself to someone who refused to meet you halfway. In a way, your silence became a mirror. It reflected back everything he wanted to ignore. His missed opportunity, his lack of appreciation, and his failure to recognize what he had. Until it was gone. That's a hard pill to swallow because it doesn't offer a chance for redemption or repair. It only offers the truth of loss. And sometimes the loudest message isn't the one shouted, but the one left unspoken. Your quiet exit wasn't just an absence. It was a statement. A statement of strength, of dignity, and of moving forward without looking back. And that, more than anything else, is what truly broke him. So here's the truth wrapped in all of this. When he rejected you and you chose to ignore him, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, you didn't just walk away from a person. You walked toward a stronger, wiser version of yourself. You stopped feeding his ego, reclaimed your emotional power, and showed him what real dignity looks like. What really broke him wasn't your absence or silence alone. It was the fact that you refused to chase, refused to beg, and most importantly, refused to let his rejection define your worth. You became the author of your own story, choosing peace over pain, growth over stagnation, and freedom over captivity. And that kind of strength shakes people who assumed they held the reins. Because when you stand firm in your value, when you move on without looking back, it forces others to confront the reality that they lost something truly irreplaceable. Remember this, your worth is never up for negotiation. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after being rejected isn't to convince someone to see it. It's to show them what happens when you finally see it for yourself. That's what breaks the cycle. That's what changes the game. And ultimately, that's what sets you free.